Hi, I'm Noam and we're going to make some cookies. I've just finished the video for our basic cookie recipe and some chocolate chip and walnut cookies, and now I'm going to walk you through making mint chocolate cookies. For this recipe you will need 2 cups and a bit of flour, 2 cups of sugar. You can do 2 cups brown, 2 cups white. I'm going to do 1 of each. Going to need a little bit of mint and peppermint extract, about a teaspoonful or so, about a teaspoon of vanilla, about a half teaspoon of salt, although adjust to taste, about a half teaspoon each of baking powder and baking soda, just over a cup of butter, and 2 eggs. I highly recommend a stand mixer. If you have an electric mixer, that works as well. If you have a bowl and a spoon, that will be good exercise, and really all you actually need. We're going to start with our butter and our chocolate chips. And I've cubed this butter in a microwave-safe bowl. I'm just going to spread it out a little bit so that I can pour the chocolate right over it and not have it overflow. Please don't overflow. And eat it with a spoon. No, don't do that. Our butter and chocolate mixture goes into the microwave, and I'm going to heat it up for about a minute. Hopefully that is enough to get it nice and melted. We want the whole thing to turn into a kind of buttery chocolate soup. Appetizing as that sounds, it's going to be amazing. If that mixture comes out of the microwave looking uneven and weird and kind of sludgy, that is fine. We basically want the chocolate to be melted enough that it mixes in, so we don't want solid or semi-solid chips. We want a nice, fairly liquidy, chocolatey base, even if it's still fairly separate from the butter, because we're going to mix those in the mixer or in your bowl. While that was in the microwave, I cracked 2 eggs into my mixer, and because I'm a lazy person with a stand mixer, I'm just going to throw my mix in and have the mixer beat the eggs as it beats them into the butter and chocolate mixture. If you're working with just a bowl or even just a hand mixer, you probably want to beat the eggs first and then mix the other stuff in. But one of the fun things with baking is just trying to see what happens when you just throw everything in and mix. And usually it won't change the results all that much. Feel free to experiment. After a bit of mixing, I now have a delicious looking, but you shouldn't eat it yet, mix of eggs, butter, and chocolate. And now we're going to just keep adding some ingredients in. So I'm going to start with my liquids and get about a teaspoon of vanilla in. If you want to be careful about your measurements, measure it with a spoon. I'm going to do it by eye and just get a nice little pool. The vanilla is not crucial in this recipe, but it adds a little bit of flavor, a little bit of complexity. And then about a teaspoon of mint and peppermint extract. And I like my cookies minty when they've got mint in them, so I'm just putting in a tiny bit extra. This you'll adjust to taste. It's a little bit tricky because it's very hard to tell how minty they're going to be until they're actually baked. So it's a thing that you can taste the first batch that you make and then adjust the amount of peppermint extract as you go for subsequent batches. We're going to add in half a teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of baking powder, between half a teaspoon and 1 teaspoon of salt. Depends on how salty you like these. Generally, the salt is not there to give it really salty flavor. It's there to give the sugar something to work against and the general sweetness, because you've got the sweetness from the chocolate as well as the sweetness from the sugar. So the salt helps to cut through that and also just layer in some extra flavors. So that's my about a teaspoon of salt. Again, if you want exact measures, use a measuring spoon, and then you can record exactly how much you used and compare that to how it turned out and adjust every time you make the recipe until you get the version that you're happy with. The basic proportions for this recipe are 1 cup each, or well, 2 cups of sugar, 1 cup each of brown and white. I'm actually adjusting this a tiny bit because there's so much sugar in the chocolate. This is a little bit less than a full cup of the brown sugar and about 3/4 of a cup of the white sugar, because honestly these are going to be plenty sweet without having to put all that sugar in, although we want some of it just for the texture and consistency. I've now mixed in the sugar, and I have a fairly smooth, fairly thick batter that is going to get thicker and hopefully even smoother as I add in the flour. So I'm going to use between 2 and 2.5 cups of flour, so that's 1 heaping cup, and I'm going to mix these in one at a time so that I don't get clouds of flour. And here's my second heaping cup of flour. Make sure I get it in. There we go. At this point, if you want just chocolate mint cookies, you can stop here and start forming the cookies and getting them into the oven. I want these to be double chocolate mint cookies, so I'm going to throw in some more chocolate chips as well. They're not going to change the flavor all that much, but they will change the consistency and give us that nice melty crunch of the chocolate chips. Between 3/4 of a cup and 1 cup of chocolate chips, but it's always way more fun to just pour them out of the bag until it looks ready. Delicious as that batter looks, I'm not going to recommend eating it, but I will recommend tasting it just so you can get a sense of how much mint is in there, how much salt is in there. This is a standard 16x9 baking tray, and I've got 20 very small cookies on here. Each one of these spheres is about 1 teaspoon, so I'm looking for kind of small, dainty, bite-sized cookies, 1 or 2 bites, and I will get a lot of them. If you want your cookies bigger and heftier, just use more dough for each cookie. You still want to give them a couple of inches between each cookie so that they don't merge together as they melt and bake. I've preheated the oven to 350, and I'm just going to throw these in. You want the cookies pretty close to the top, so not so close that they're going to burn, but maybe 1 rack down. And then if you're doing multiple racks at the same time, just below that. If I had more racks, I could do 3, possibly 4 trays of cookies simultaneously, but I'm stuck with just the 2, so this is going to take a little while. Just like with the basic cookies, I've got a bit of an industrial process going here, so I have 2 trays of cookies in the oven right now, a 3rd tray ready to go. On this 3rd one, I've made the cookies a little bit larger, so I've just got 12 on my tray here. I wanted to try making them just a bit more substantial. So now, the top tray should be ready, and these are coming out. Bottom tray is not quite ready yet, still a little bit melty, and they're just moving up to the top, and our new tray is going in to the bottom. Now I've transferred my first tray of cookies still on their parchment paper right onto the cooling rack, and I'm going to wait a couple more seconds for them to cool down enough to move them directly onto the 2nd rack. The melted chocolate gives these guys a fair bit of structure, so they tend to stay pretty thick and not spread out as much as other cookies do. I like that, so I'm leaving them fairly spherical when I put them in because I like that thickness, and it keeps them nice and chewy in the center. And now that these are on the rack, I've taken the parchment sheet that I just used for them, put it back on the tray, and I'm going to use that to prepare my next tray of cookies. I might make these ones a little bit bigger. That doubled recipe gave me 6 full trays of cookies, and just to compare, that's tray number 1, tray number 2, tray number 3, where they were still spherical but a little bit bigger. 4, 5, and 6 were the same amount of dough. I just flattened them out so you get this somewhat more cookie-shaped cookie and a little bit less of the thickness. For the rest of them, I've transferred them into these plastic containers, or this tower of goodness, and that recipe yielded just over 80 cookies. So hoping that people are very hungry tomorrow, but I'll have these on tap for a while. For each of these batches, they stayed in the oven for between 5 and 10 minutes, closer to 10 minutes for the bigger ones. If I went any bigger than that, I would probably go 10 to 12 minutes in the oven. That's my preference is for soft, chewy cookies. If you like your cookies a little bit more crispy, then you can just leave them in for a few minutes longer and you'll get nicely crisped up.